Time is something we only have so much of, all of us. And I want to thank you for taking a few minutes today to be here for this, which is going to be about optimism. And it's the middle of a thought here. Optimism is something that I value. Optimism about the future, optimism about making the world a better place, optimism truly about today, right now, really. I mean, I'm optimistic about this conversation. A glass half full view certainly isn't something that I'm able to carry all the time. However, optimism does seem to make hard times at least a little bit better. And hard times are part of life. I don't believe this world is perfect, and like many people, I want to see the world be a better place. Now, the world is a shorthand way to reference humanity as a whole, inclusive of every single person. Making the world a better place means making a better world possible for every single person, without exception. My thoughts and beliefs, which I'm going to talk about in part today, rely on the insights of many others, both recently and from far into the past, who have had the courtesy of writing down or recording their beliefs about how to make the world a better place. What I'm going to talk about today isn't particularly new or novel. And whether you agree with me or not at the end of this, rest assured, I won't demand that you agree with me. I am interested in what you believe to be true. I'm asking a question. If you were to make a claim to stand by a belief about how to make the world better, what would it be? Part of the reason I thought to put this together is because I'm interested in your answer. I value that discussion, even debate over things that matter. I personally believe it's healthy and fulfilling. My claim, my belief, what I would like to put forward today is that capitalism is the only moral system for us to choose. I'm making the claim that capitalism as a system is moral, both because of the results that capitalism yields and also the way that these results are achieved. And I want to spend these few minutes, this limited time here today, talking about the moral means rather than the moral end result. And my reason for talking about the means rather than the end result is that I truly believe each of the systems in our world are working toward the same goals, or at least they certainly claim they are. Advocates of capitalism and socialism and communism and libertarianism and many others are vocal that they want healthier people, happier people, and more fulfilled people. These are puzzle pieces to a better world. And these systems available to us, they also, advocates claim to want to accomplish these moral goods in a way that minimizes or eliminates harm along the way. Less healthy people, less happy people, less fulfilled people. You can see the directions that we can move from this moment in time. Better or worse. These systems are currently in competition for each of our support, for our buy-in, for our effort. And each of these systems acknowledge that this better world is aspirational. We aren't there yet. We don't live in a perfect world. And in fact, sometimes it feels like we're living in a very imperfect world. So the question that we're faced with is, what system should we choose to best pursue the goal of a better world? What system should we choose if we want healthier people, happier people, and more fulfilled people? And despite agreeing on this goal, there is no other system that achieves this as effectively, inclusively, and as sustainably as capitalism. And I think we should be specific. The meaning of words is important. Capitalism, it is a system where every person is free to exchange value, and the minimum proper role of government is to protect individual rights. Of course, I am aware that this doesn't jive with some people's understanding of what capitalism is, and I want to clear the air on that. If you believe that the right system to choose is one where every single person, without exception, is treated with dignity, and every person has the opportunity to pursue a good life, it really doesn't matter what you call it. If we can agree that we want a system that increases health and happiness and fulfillment without hurting people, the label doesn't really matter. I'm a capitalist, and that's what I'm working toward. You could call it valuism or respectism or happinessism. I mean, call it anything you'd like. It's the principle that matters, not the name. I mentioned earlier that I rely on some other folks for this. And even what I just said, this isn't a new or novel idea. And it's also something that it's not best expressed in Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, right? The capitalist core book here. The core principle of capitalism is unifying. And I think it is well said in a quote by the Dalai Lama, who said, if you can help others. If you cannot do that, at least do not harm them. No system is going to make every person as healthy and happy, as fulfilled as they could possibly be. That's not a fault in any particular system. It's because we live in a world with finite resources. We live in an imperfect world. We have limited time. We have limited ability. Even physical resources are limited on a grand scale. Don't get me started on the various kinds of imperfections that this world has. When we ask, what system should we choose to achieve the goal of a better world? Our goal then, in a world that isn't perfect, is to maximize the good and minimize the bad for every person. And I'm going to ask that you keep that in mind. We're seeking to maximize the good and minimize the bad for every single person. And I'm saying it this way because the life of a person can be improved. But you cannot improve the life of people because there is no such thing. And that's one of the realities that I want to discuss. As part of the human condition, there is no such thing as an independent collective. Every human collective, a business, a state, a town, a team, a family, is composed of individuals. To maximize health and happiness and fulfillment, it is necessary to choose a system that is consistent with the reality that every single person is interrelated, but beautifully separate and unique, valuable, and deserving of dignity. There's a famous author by the name of Aldous Huxley. He's a famous author who describes this reality in one of his books called The Doors to Perception. He says, we live together, we act on and react to one another, but always and in all circumstances we are by ourselves. From family to nation, every human group is a society of island universes. No matter how we try to express what we experience, and we do try all the time through our writing, through music, through art, through video, through business memos and high fives, through the most intimate physical moments, our deepest conversations with our closest friends. In all of these instances, we communicate who we are. We communicate what we value, what we find to be beautiful. And despite these efforts, sometimes incredible efforts, we can never fully understand what it is to be another person. I can never fully express what it is like to be uniquely me, and you cannot fully express what it is to be you. We can send signals through many, many means, but they may not be received. And that's not a sad statement. I mean, we're all still hanging out. We're all still acting on and reacting to. We're all living with each other. It's just an important reality to acknowledge. And it's part of the choice in a better system. And it's something that can also be really beautiful. Another author, Rob Bell. He's a guy, he was among Time Magazine's top 100 most influential people. He's a prolific author, and he writes, you create something and then you share it with others. And they have their own experience of it, which may have similarities to why you made it in the first place, and may not. They may have an experience way beyond anything you ever could have imagined for whatever it is that you've created. And that's part of what this is, right? I'm talking about something that I find valuable. I also think it's said much more succinctly by Huxley, again, who talks about this communication between individuals. And he says, symbols can never be the things that they stand for. This is another reality of the human condition that is not new or novel. It's certainly not something that I'm taking any credit for coming up with. It's been recognized throughout recorded human history. In the 6th century BC, an author, Lao Tzu, wrote in the Tao Te Ching, the Tao that can be understood is not the eternal cosmic Tao, just as an idea that can be expressed in words is not the infinite idea. The Bhagavad Gita, a Hindu text at least 25 centuries old, speaks of the Atman, the individual essence found in each person. More recently, we see this with the founding fathers of the United States, who held to be self-evident that all people are created equal with certain unalienable rights, notably the pursuit of happiness, which is unique for each person. What these great thinkers recognize and state correctly is perhaps best summed up in a quote that may or may not be from Oscar Wilde. There's some debate about who said this, but the quote is, "Be yourself. Everyone else is taken." And for a system that we choose to be moral, it must be compatible with that reality. And that's a mark in favor of capitalism, which insists that every single person, without exception, has value. It's a big claim. It's a big claim to say that everyone has value, and it's also one that I don't feel a particular need to defend. People who believe that there are some humans who don't have value, who don't deserve equal rights and dignity as humans, can try to defend that. I am interested in a better world for every person. And as a capitalist, I believe it to be true that every single person has value, and therefore an unalienable right to pursue their individual happiness. As capitalists, we celebrate that in this crazy world, this imperfect world, each person has wonderfully diverse goals, different passions, different definitions of what is beautiful, different hopes for a better future, or perhaps very similar goals, similar views of beauty and hopes for a better future. I can't speak for anyone but myself. Any system that tries to force one person's version of happiness onto someone else is inconsistent with the belief that every person has value. And those systems, they exist. Opposite of capitalism, which treats people as valuable individuals, are any systems that sort people into groups or collectives. These are called collectivist systems. Involuntary collectivist systems ignore the dignity and unalienable rights of each person by treating them as part of a group, treating them as lesser, limiting their individual version of happiness. These systems are inconsistent and incompatible with being human. What collectivist systems do is they create an in-group and they create an out-group, the haves and the have-nots. And when rules are put in place based on groups, the out-group loses their ability to pursue happiness. They are forced into a version of happiness that's, hey, it's right for the in-group, and they get left behind. This is the tyranny of the majority, and it's a concern that has been expressed, again, not a new or novel idea. It's been expressed by Plato, Aristotle, Madison, Tocqueville, John Stuart Mill, among many others. We find this often in music, especially. Limiting happiness, too, it is a genuine concern, not just for those in the minority, but also those in the majority of a collectivist system, because it isn't all or nothing, perfectly happy or unhappy. Every person is at risk of having some of their rights violated, some of their happiness limited. There's an easy example of the moral problem relevant in this conversation, and that is that you cannot live as a capitalist in a collectivist system. Your view that each person, including yourself, has value is in the minority. So it must be discarded, along with a part of your ability to pursue happiness, or you could be fined, jailed, or killed in deference to someone else's version of a better world. Capitalism, on the other hand, is inclusive. Even those who would wish to live in a communist society are actually free to pursue that version of beauty. So long as the participants there are voluntary, go for it. I only know what's best for me, not what's best for you. Capitalism is morally superior to any collective system because it applies consistently to and increases opportunity at a better life for every human being, regardless of their circumstances, their values, or their beliefs. It is accepting of every version of beauty, every aspirational goal, and every new venture that does not cause harm to others. It's important to get into the details here, though, because collectivist systems are a dangerous opponent to capitalism, primarily because they assert that, in fact, they are increasing moral good. They are reaching a better world on the systemic scale. But inherent to being collective, they fail the moral test because they're okay hurting people, violating their rights, treating some people as lesser to achieve a better world on average. As capitalists, we want to raise the bar, not by skewing data to the average and leaving some people behind, but by protecting the rights of every person without exception. It also happens to be the case that collectivist systems are unsustainable. Even small gains toward a better world, things that are touted in daily news as accomplishments that provide short-term increases in health and happiness and fulfillment, they fail on two fronts. First, they hurt some people to get there. And second, they result in a drop, even a reset, a complete loss of advances once sustainability limits are reached, and sometimes before. And that's been shown time and time again. A moral system has to work for the long term. And there is a natural and ugly end to running a business, a system, a culture, from each according to his ability, and to each according to their need. It's inflexible, and it also it only meets the needs of a select few at the expense of others. On the other side of this, capitalism is both flexible and inclusive. There's room for the unique versions of happiness found in every person, both present and future, works for the long term. Capitalism and the human condition go together. I don't want this to sound like I'm saying capitalism is easy, because it allows each person to decide for themselves. You are the only person who can decide what is valuable for yourself. And what you choose might make you the only person in the world who holds a particular belief. Or it could make you one of millions who agrees with you. Whether you are one of the millions in agreement about a particular belief or you're the only person in the world who holds that particular belief, you as a human being have the right to pursue your happiness without hurting others. I mean, it's another principle that has deep historical roots. It's a tenet that has stood the test of time. Going back, way back, quote, each honoring other, man reaches the highest. That was written more than 2,500 years ago in the Bhagavad Gita. Henry David Thoreau, a little more recently at least, wrote from his cabin on Walden Pond, go confidently in the direction of your dreams. Live the life you've imagined. Personally, I like the Dave Grohl quote a little bit more, and he says, no one is you, and that is your power. A capitalist system ensures that both the majority and the minority are secure in their rights. There's a limit to acceptable behavior. I call it a moral floor. It's a hard line that is immoral to cross without consent. Choosing a system to reach for a better world that didn't have a moral floor, it wouldn't be a world that I would want to live in. In a world without a moral floor, our goal is just to increase happiness on average, no matter what. Imagine Well, imagine the greatest comedian in the world. Your Carlin, your Pryor, Jim Carrey, Steve Martin. Imagine the best comedian. There are so many out there. And take into context this information from the Mayo Clinic. The Mayo Clinic says a good laugh has great effects. When you start to laugh, it doesn't just lighten your load mentally, it actually induces physical changes in your body. The Mayo Clinic says that laughter can stimulate many organs. It could activate and relieve your stress response. It can soothe tension, improve your immune system. It can relieve pain. It can increase personal satisfaction and improve your mood. Health and happiness and fulfillment, all right there. In a system without a moral floor, I would be justified in kidnapping Jim Carrey, keeping him tied up in my basement, and forcing him to perform live shows one after the other on a live stream so every other person could get those benefits of laughter. A live streamed show would increase everyone else's health and their happiness and their fulfillment. So how selfish is Jim Carrey, right? He should go to the basement willingly for everyone else's benefit, right? No, of course not. Jim Carrey has rights, just like every other person, to their version of happiness. And thankfully, for his love of art or money or fame or whatever value it is that Jim Carrey receives, we're lucky enough to get some value in return. We get some of the best slapstick comedy that has ever been created, also some of the most incredible dramatic performances that we've ever seen. We don't need Jim Carrey hogtied under the moral floor. Capitalism insists that comedians, like every other person, have rights and are respected as valuable individuals. I actually think that this is interesting because Jim Carrey speaks to this at least a little bit. One of his quotes is, "If you've got a talent, protect it." Capitalism offers that protection for every person's talent, not just those at the top. We have already discussed a little bit that we don't live in a perfect world. And that's a reality that includes flawed people, which, by the way, seems to be all of us in my experience. I have yet to find a perfectly moral, flawless human being. There's a quote from James Madison. He talks a little bit about this. He said, in a very famous quote you've probably heard before, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." Remember, we aren't talking about perfection here. Our goal in an imperfect world, a flawed world, is to choose a system where we can maximize the good and minimize the bad for every person. And that means a system that can cope with and operates in the reality that some people make efforts to hurt others for a myriad of reasons. Capitalism meets this challenge by taking the widest definition that does no harm and allows for the greatest possible number of iterations of individual happiness that does not cause harm. Freedom of action, of course, doesn't mean freedom from consequences. And that's baked into the definition of capitalism. The second part of the definition of capitalism reads that the minimum proper role of government is to protect individual rights. What capitalism does is it allows us to efficiently and sustainably use some of those limited resources that we have in this imperfect world, and we can focus them on the instances where harm has been done. And that's truly what a justice system needs to be effective. To put it a little more bluntly, I guess, there is a space in a capitalist system for every person who isn't harming other people. And that's consistent with a happier world. Part of protecting individual rights is the baseline of consent. And a moral feature of capitalism is that it requires consent. It asks for consent, and it's a system that respects consent. In a capitalist system, limiting someone else's happiness, it requires their consent. Capitalism is about people. And truly, it's not about just any people. It's about you. It's about your life. It's about living a better life. I don't want this to sound like capitalism. Capitalism isn't about being perfect every day. or always picking the most valuable thing. It's an intensely personal process. Though we can ask those we admire for their advice, we can strive to be more like others who have achieved maybe what we're working toward, and we can learn about how others got to where they are. Each of us are those island universes that Huxley describes. I believe that kindness is a valuable act, and that includes being kind to yourself. You have value. You have the right to pursue your happiness, to find what is valuable to you, and also to not be hurt along the way. Kindness to other people, I believe to be a valuable act. Capitalism is a moral system because it's where we practice assigning value. As an economic system, we practice exchanging value all the time. We're aware of when a dollar doesn't go as far as we want it to. As an interpersonal system, we exchange all kinds of currency. And I realize, even as I say this, that it's a silly, cheap thing to call love and art and expressions of creativity and passion, excitement, and everything else that goes along with being a human being that makes us happy, currency. I know that's cheap. I'm speaking to something deeper, but words, symbols can never be the things that they stand for. But those are the kinds of value each person has the right to exchange freely. And this is personal, meaning to each person. Thinking in terms of value is a skill that you can choose to practice. You can choose the things in your life that elicit your passion. The opposite of valuable is cheap, and each person can choose valuable or choose cheap. Another moral feature of capitalism, beyond giving you the opportunity for that choice, is that it yields better ideas. The things that we value most are our values. We have things that are called values, right? Fairness, justice, honesty, security, etc. And in the same way that we can spend money on a product that we value more, we can spend time and effort on ideas that bring us happiness. The definition of capitalism isn't a system where people are just free to seek money. Capitalism is a system where people are free to seek value. And in a capitalist system, value can be assessed outwards and also inward. It's a decision to think kindness is important, for example. Capitalism, it isn't some utopian vision of every person being perfect. It can't be in an imperfect world. It's a system that allows each person to freely learn about value and to pursue value. It's a system that is consistent with and accepting of the imperfect world that we live in and still says, hey, you got this. Strive to be better. It's a system that allows each and every person to evaluate where they are now, choose something to make their future better, and ensures each person has the safety to pursue that value. It's also the case that our values change. The things I valued when I was a baby are certainly different than the things I value now, and it's only in a capitalist system where values are truly free to change. In a collectivist system, one where one version of beauty is decided to be the best and is codified into a law or a rule for which you can be punished for breaking, it actually becomes dangerous to change your mind, dangerous to change your values, even to make improvements. It's no longer a race to the highest values. It's a game of whose values can stay the same despite a changing world, randomly or otherwise. And change is a constant in this world. Yesterday is different than today. Regardless of whether you choose to join those of us who are working toward a moral future, it's a reality still that only individuals can act. And it's a question of what you personally are going to do. What choices are you going to make? There's a philosopher, his name is Alan Watts, and I'm going to do a quote, but forgive me, I can't do an impression of his voice. He says, "The only place to begin is now, because here is where we are. So why put it off?" A lot of people say, "I'm not ready." What do you mean you're not ready? What do you have to be ready? I love that quote. Because in other words, you can't change the past, and the future is abstract. Now is the only time that you can choose valuable acts in your own life. And that's the opportunity every person deserves. Capitalists embrace this reality and say, not only are you uniquely and wonderfully yourself, but you get to choose what you value, and you get to go get it without hurting others. And again, that's not to say that this is an easy task, not the not hurting others piece. That should go without saying. The hard part is the awareness of what you value. The first step is the hardest, in my opinion, because of what I mentioned earlier. I have yet to meet a perfectly moral person. Transitioning from where we are to a moral world requires that we evaluate the morality of what we're doing right now. It becomes necessary to think. All right, that was a little bit of a heavy one. Let's pull back for a minute. I want to ask a question, and I'm going to pause, and I'm going to let you consider an answer. If you wouldn't mind, please stop what you're doing. If you're driving while listening to this, please pull over. If you are eating, please put down your utensils and pause. If you're sitting here with me, be present. Regardless of what you're doing, focus on this question until I tell you to stop. My question is, what do you value? All right, did you choose something? Do you have something in your mind? Did you just keep driving? Did you just keep eating? Did you focus and make a choice? You know, even if you didn't stop, you still made a choice. You chose to keep driving and be on time for that meeting, or you chose that the meal you are eating is more important than what you're saying. And I get it. You chose what is more valuable to you. Choosing something, deciding that something has value, is something that we're all capable of. Did 20 seconds of silence and nature noises seem long? How long do you normally spend thinking about what you value in the course of any day? Humans have preferences. From infants to the elderly, preferences on big things and small things in life. And when we value something, we can choose it. It's possible, of course, to make bad choices. I mean, a choice is always made. Even not doing something is still a choice. And every single human being has the natural human right to make that choice. I mentioned a famous James Madison quote earlier, right? He said, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." And that quote goes on. He says, in framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this: you must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. And I take issue with Mr. Madison here, because his statement isn't clear. A collective can't act. A government can't act. Only an individual can act. And that means only you can make choices in your own life, or you are choosing to give away the choice to someone else. So you can choose. You can act. You can be the best version of yourself or the worst version of yourself if you choose to be. Being yourself, though, it takes courage. There are certainly a lot of people saying, be more like me. And the social pressure, economic pressure, and even legal pressure to adhere to someone else's version of a better life, someone else's version of happiness, it can be a lot. It takes courage to say no to someone else's version of happiness, especially if they are happy being them. It can be very attractive. It can take courage to say no if someone's threatening you to be more like them. In a capitalist framework, you can pursue the happiness that you believe is best, and you are safe and secure saying no. You are safe and secure quitting someone else's version of happiness. To speak directly on why the morality of capitalism even matters, capitalists are optimists. We want what's best for ourselves and what's best for others. Capitalism as a system acknowledges and we acknowledge that we can't fully understand the needs of someone else. We can't understand fully their happiness, and the best path, therefore, is to offer support voluntarily and otherwise get out of the way. It also means giving yourself and others the space to think about what is important, what is valuable. How are people taking time in their own lives to think about that? It isn't possible to flip a switch and make the world a perfectly moral place. But what we can do in our own lives is make choices, have preferences, choose what has value. And we can each choose valuable acts. And we can do that immediately. As soon as we know what is important to ourselves, only an individual capable of making choices can choose to pursue what they find valuable. Now, I believe that each person, without exception, has value. I believe that your uniqueness as an individual makes your experience worthwhile. And you might not share my belief. And truly, I respect your right to a different version of beauty, a different version of a better world. My challenge, if that is your direction, is to imagine, would the world be a better place? Would the world be better if every person believed other people have value? Would there be more happiness, greater health, a deeper fulfillment? You know, even if you disagree with everything I've said, it's still a reality that you are unlike any person who has ever lived before. You are different from any person who exists now, and different from any person who will ever exist again. That makes your life one of a kind. And quite frankly, we've tried systems where some people are treated as lesser, and they don't work. I'm suggesting that you and I, and every person, have the natural ability to choose morality, to choose value, to practice valuable acts in our lives. And I'm optimistic that other people are interested in this goal as well. I am not alone. You are not alone. I'd like to leave you, I guess, with one final thought. And that is that you might not like that capitalists, valuists, those of us who practice happyism, you might not like that we choose to strive to act in a moral way. You might not like that we choose not to harm others. And though I truly, genuinely hope that you choose to join us, you don't have to choose my version of beauty. And you are absolutely not allowed to stop those of us who want a moral system from creating one without you. As individuals who want a better future, we're going to keep coming together voluntarily and working toward that goal. We're going to continue to evaluate what we value and make choices based on that. And when we find that we are part of something that does harm, that treats people as lesser, that violates their rights, we're going to choose to leave. Capitalism is the only moral system available to us. Capitalism is compassionate, it's optimistic, it's an empowering system cheering you on to a better future. Only an individual can act, not some abstract individual. You can act, you can choose. Working toward a better world requires actually taking intentional action. And I hope sincerely that you choose valuable acts, not because what you choose is going to be something that I like. I am certain that we have at least one difference of opinion. I hope you choose valuable acts for you, for your better life, for your future self, for you right now. I truly, genuinely wish you all the best. And I'm optimistic about what comes next. Living a better life is certainly more valuable than talking about a better life. Time is a finite resource, part of this imperfect world, and I hope we can make the most of it for us and for future generations. I'm so grateful. Thank you for spending some of that precious, limited time with me today.